So, hi, everybody. Welcome back to a featured class for in Beth Lita's educational component. Joshua Schwartz, the spiritual leader of the synagogue here. And it's, this is a kind of a recurrence or a completion of sorts because the first major class that we did, at least online, was, if I remember correctly, the mini series on Tshuva that we did in advance of the High Holy Days last year. So there's something very sweet about doing this again with you all. So it's good to reconnect in this kind of way. I'm glad it was good. And I hope this will also be good. So last year we did Tshuva, and I didn't want to repeat myself, although of course we should be constantly thinking of Tshuva. But this year I wanted to have a different hook and actually tailor it specifically to Rosh Hashanah. So we're going to do the next 2 weeks of classes will be focused on, I would say, maybe the experiential center of what it means to be in Elul leading into the new year, namely the sound of the shofar. And I think this is something that, kicks off, sounding the shofar and reciting the David psalm are kind of the two, when you hear these things happen, it starts to catalyze something within you in terms of the experience of Elul. Now, the fact that minyan public davening is a lot harder to come by, especially on non-Shabbos. So maybe the shofar hasn't been in our immediate experience as much, but I wanted to have this class to serve as a kind of compensation for that, to think about what the shofar means. So this week, we're going to focus on how the shofar interacts with us. And next week, we're going to focus actually on what the shofar does beyond us, how it actually is said to even have a resounding resonance, even in the highest reaches of heaven. So this will be the 2 classes preceding Rosh Hashanah, and then before Yom Kippur, we'll have a special pre-Yom Kippur class as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So this week we're going to focus on the experience of hearing the shofar, plumbing into our understanding of what that means. So before we get into the text, and don't worry, as always, there are too many texts. But when you think of the shofar, what comes to mind? What comes to mind in terms of what comes to mind for you when you hear it, when you think of shofar? What do you associate with the shofar?
Waking up, being aware that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are coming.
Okay. So awakening and awareness. Great.
Yeah.
No wrong answers. It's like exciting. It's a special occasion. It's something that's unique for that time of year. So.
Mm-hmm. There's something that's just itself about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing like it. It's true. Okay, those are some good seeds, and we're going to see noise breaking into space. That's a very interesting way of putting that, Nancy. You mean that there's a sense of a disruption of sorts? Yeah, there's something that pierces you, right? The sound is a blast of the shofar, right? That's how it's commonly translated. It's not just the sound of the shofar, but it's the horn blast, right? It takes you into awareness. Okay. Great. So we're going to see, I think, as always, the way in which our own intuitive reflections about the shofar are themselves actually appear and are reflected in the texts about it. And then maybe we'll also see some new ideas as well. So let's look at some, oh, wonderful. Let's look at some special texts. Oops, I hid my browser there. Okay. Great. Can everyone see the screen okay? Fabulous. Okay. So we'll start with a Talmudic text. And, as we've been learning for a little while now, there's inside and there's outside in yeshiva parlance. Inside means we'll kind of do it word by word. We'll look at it. Outside means we kind of just refer to it. So I would say this one, it's not the shortest thing. And I just kind of want to get to the point of it. So with this Talmudic text from the Talmudic tractate of Arafin. Arafin is a very befuddling tractate. It's very particular. It's about the measurements in the temple. And remember that very few rabbis lived during the time of the Second Temple. Most of them lived in a post-temple world. So a lot of it was done by reconstruction of oral testimony and oral tradition. So their attempt is actually incredible practice of visualization in their minds, right? They're trying to reconstruct the temple in their consciousness. It's a fascinating text. Engages your imagination in a really interesting way. But like the rabbis always do, they're trying to argue about it to figure out what stands on two legs. But here they're trying to reimagine what it was like to not just see the temple in its physical schematic, but also to re-experience the service in the temple. So while Susie's quite right that shofar is unique to Rosh Hashanah, but we'll see later why. But shofarot and chatzotzrot, trumpets and ram's horns, were also used as regular features of the temple service. So it's definitely unique to nowadays in a post-temple world. But here comes the interesting question about Rosh Hashanah as a unique experience versus the day-to-day humdrum existence of the temple of davening. So it says that everyone is obligated to blow the shofar, including Kohanim, Leviim, and regular Jews. And the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? Of course, everyone has the mitzvah to hear the shofar, Yadoi. And it says, no, we need it. The question says, why do we even need to say that, right? That's a common question in the Talmud. And this is, we needed to say that because Kohanim mitztarich. It's specifically that we had to say that Kohanim need to hear the shofar. Why? Because they're the ones who blow the shofar in the temple. Okay, I think that's really, in a sense, where I just want to stop with this Talmud. I kind of want to leave it tantalizing in a sense, but why am I bringing up this fragment of the Talmud? Think about it. Why are the rabbis raising the question of whether it's obvious or not that the Kohanim need to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? This same Talmudic discussion actually shows up also in the tractate of Rosh Hashanah. I think it's more interesting in Arafin. But why? Or what's the rabbi's issue? Right? It says, everyone needs to hear the shofar. Kohanim, Levites, and Stam, regular Jews. And then the Talmud says, obviously, Pshita. It says, no, we had to say this because you might have thought maybe Kohanim didn't. And what motivates that reasoning? Since the Kohanim, the priests, were the ones who used the shofar all year, you might think what?
That it doesn't have that importance for them. It becomes a regular thing.
Okay, good. So that there's some kind of habituation to it, which might perhaps get in the way of what's going on in Rosh Hashanah. So you can look at it from that direction. And the other side of it is, yeah?
I also was thinking, when you're the one doing something, sometimes you take yourself out of it. You're not participating in the sort of experiential part of it because you're busy doing it or leading it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. Exactly. I think speaking as somebody who works as a Jewish professional, it's a very different thing to be a service provider than it is to be a Jew in the pew. Right. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine who also has a beautiful voice and a beautiful leader of prayers. And I was asking what his plans are for the High Holy Days. I was asking if he was leading where he was living again. And he said, actually, I was thinking maybe taking a year off. I just want to, I want to be on the receiving end. I want to just be in the community. I said, you know what? I hear you. And I'm jealous. But there's something very different about letting it wash over you, kind of being buoyed by what's happening versus being the person who's providing it. It's very different, it's very hard to pray when you're praying for others. So there's one side of it, let's say the experience of the Kohen, right? Either because they're used to it or because They are the providers of the experience. Maybe there's something going wrong there. But then, Susie, just think of it logically, then the argument would go the other way. You say, oh, all the more so they need to be hearing it on Rosh Hashanah to get past these barriers. But the rabbis propose or posit that maybe the Kohanim don't need to. And then they say, no, that's not true. They do need to. And it seems like it's because they're hearing it all year. Since they're hearing it all year, maybe they're Yotzei, right? Maybe they don't need to hear it anymore on Rosh Hashanah. But the answer they insist on is that every single person needs to, and that's why that teaching exists. Kohanim, Levites, and Israelites, they all need to hear the shofar. The reason I include this Talmud, it's a little bit like slantwise, but I was really interestingly like provoked by it, because even though it kind of leaves us in this ambivalent place about whether the priests will be able to fight through their habits to really hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, that's the question, right? Do we see it? That's the question. The question of hearing the shofar is whether you can really hear it or not. And the rabbis insist everyone needs to, despite potential contingencies, conflicting factors, what have you. But everyone needs to hear it. So, what's really the mitzvah of shofar? It seems like it's not just hearing a sound, but something else is supposed to happen inside of you. And that's the hook, that the shofar is not just the thing itself. It's a catalyst that's supposed to trigger something happening inside of you. And that is now the motivating question behind what's going to drive the rest of this discussion. Okay, does that make sense? That the shofar is supposed to be initiating something that's supposed to occur inside of us. That the sound matters insofar as it does something. And that's the question that's kind of arousing the rabbi's concern. Okay. So the question now I want to say, so we started with some kind of just associative thinking about what happens, what do you think of when you hear the shofar? But now I wanted to ask kind of a related question. What do you need to really hear the shofar? This is shofar as a practice of being called to attention about something. It's making you change. It's catalyzing some kind of metamorphosis in you. It's starting a chain reaction, the chain reaction of Elul, the chain reaction of tshuva. So what do we need to really hear the shofar? That is going to be what's going to frame the next halachot we're going to look at from the Rambam. So the Rambam talks about the shofar in two places in his Code of Jewish Law. The first one in his Laws of Shofar. That's kind of obvious, but really it's a hook for just laws of Rosh Hashanah. And the second place, as we'll see at the end of this class, is actually in his Laws of Tshuva, his Laws of Repentance. But let's start by, the technical requirements of shofar. And he gets very into the weeds about it. He's very, very detailed about it. I wanted to highlight negative laws he brings up, things he wants to make sure aren't the case. Because, like what Susie was intuiting about the potential issue with the priests, what do we need to make sure we get out of the way so that the shofar reaches us? What do we want to make sure isn't obstructing this experience of shofar? Because what we saw in the Talmud is that the experience of the shofar is what matters more than the, in brisker thinking, right? We have these, these things, chefza and the gavra. There's the thing and there's the person. It's not about the thing, or it's about the thing insofar as it does something to the person. It does matter. You have to use a shofar. Like the thing matters, but the thing matters insofar as it does something to you. So we'll see. All right. So it says, this is the third halacha, the first chapter, Hilchos Shofar. It says, "V'chein shofar shel ola lo yiskabo." You're not allowed to use the shofar that's been carved off of an animal that's been sacrificed. Specifically, the sacrifice that is entirely consumed. This an olah offering. An olah offering is only for God, and anything you use from it is what's called me'ilah. The rabbis were the first ones to complain about appropriation. That's what me'ilah is. Me'ilah is misappropriation of temple goods. So you're not allowed to use something that's dedicated to God for your own benefit. So if you use a shofar that's been taken from an animal that was supposed to be sacrificed as an olah offering, you're not allowed to use it as a shofar. But v'im taka yatsa. But if you did use it, it works. Now that's interesting. She'ein bakol din me'ilah. Because sound is not relevant for the law of appropriation. To contrast with Sukkot, which is coming up, you're not allowed to use a stolen lulav. You're not allowed to use stolen schach, a stolen sukkah. You aren't allowed to steal a shofar. But if you did, it still works. Like you still fulfill your obligation. Scandalous. What do you think about that? Think about it in a very hard-nosed way.
That really bothers me.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's because how can you do a mitzvah from with something that's stolen?
That comes through an avera?
That comes from an avera, exactly.
Technical rabbinic category called a mitzvah baba avera, right? A mitzvah that comes through doing a sin.
Yeah, it just doesn't sound right to me.
It doesn't sound right. It's not, again, it's not mutter. You're not allowed to do it. But if you did do it, you're still yotze. But interestingly, I mean, the reason I'm bringing this is actually in a way a coup de grace to the Talmud. What's the ikar of the mitzvah of the shofar? It's not the horn. It's the sound. And a sound can't be stolen. Now, to think of it like very hard-nosedly, if I take somebody's shofar and I blow it, they haven't lost anything materially speaking. There's no depreciation from a shofar. If I drop it and break it, that's different. But if I blow a shofar, it's not like there's like, oh, you can only, after 100 blows, you need to take the shofar into the shop to get a tune-up, right? It's not like I'm like causing them any like financial distress if I blow the shofar. So maybe there's any of these things. To steal sound is not really stealing. But to think of it, I think what else is the saying is that the mitzvah of shofar is located in the sound, not in the thing. And all of the things we're going to see later is so that the sound occurs. I think this goes back to what Nancy was saying before, that the sound, I mean, I think that's what everyone was saying. It's a reaction to the sound. But Nancy was saying like it's a piercing, blasting, disturbing sound. So the question really here is, for a shofar to work, the sound needs to work. The sound needs to do its job to you. The reaction to shofar is the point. The way you respond to the experience. So the experience needs to be preserved. So inappropriately, misappropriatingly, taking a shofar and using it is not allowed, but it's ancillary to the central feature of shofar, which is the sound. And sound can't be stolen. Mitzvos lo lehanos nitnu. Another really important point about shofar. Lefichach hamudar hanaya mishofar mutar liskoa about tkiyah shel mitzvah. Therefore, okay, mitzvos are not for your pleasure. Very like misnagdish, like Lithuanian hardcore point here. This is really some anti-Hasidic Torah. Mitzvahs were not given for your enjoyment. Take that, happy, clappy Kabbalat Shabbat services. Kabbalat Shabbat tomorrow on Zoom will be actually recited in a somber tone. We will be eliminating all singing and all enjoyment from it. No, just kidding. But the point is, right, is that the point of mitzvah is not aesthetic. Aesthetics are secondary to a mitzvah. Aesthetics matter, you know, again, in contrast to lulav, right? Lulav, hitter mitzvah, right? To beautify the mitzvah. And that's what, you know, why you buy this like enormous etrog, you make movies about it. But the point of the aesthetics is always towards fulfilling the mitzvah. The mitzvah isn't to be beautiful. Beauty or whatever, is to make sure that the mitzvah occurs in optimal conditions. Here, you don't blow the shofar like you play guitar. You're not playing the shofar. The point of shofar isn't music. The point of shofar is whatever this experience is supposed to be. Okay? And very interestingly, he says, therefore, somebody who took a vow, someone who took a neder, bli neder, to say, I swear off all pleasure, bli neder, right? Someone who takes a vow, swearing off all pleasure, bli neder. That person's still allowed to hear shofar. So shofar is not about the thing. It's not about the aesthetics of it, enjoying it. It's about whatever the sound is supposed to do to you. So it is a, yeah.
If that's the case,
Mhm.
if I'm sorry if I'm mistaken, but we don't blow shofar on Shabbat, right?
That is true, we don't.
So if it's such a mitzvah and it's more about, like, it's not about pleasure, or like, why do we not blow it on Shabbat?
Like, why isn't that enough to override
Like,
Shabbat?
it sounds like such an important spiritual thing that it would complement Shabbat, not.
All right, put a pin in that one. We'll get to it.
Okay.
But in a way, you're noting that the point of shofar is maybe, again, it's not even maybe the sound. It's whatever's supposed to happen inside of you. Shofar is one way to do that. It's the main way to do that. But it might be sufficient, but not necessary. You can tell my LSAT brain is still on. All right. Here we have a few halachas later. The Rambam is still trying to carve out what exactly the shofar experience, the shofar mitzvah, is supposed to be. He says, and here is again more anti-aesthetic Torah. If you added anything to the shofar, whether you kind of like took another piece of shofar and grafted it on, or you like painted gold leaf in it or on it, it's disqualified. You are not allowed to make shofar pretty, because something not pretty is happening with shofar. There's something ugly. There's something somewhere like obtuse. There's something harsh about shofar, and it shouldn't be softened, right? It's not about taming it for our taste. It's about being disturbed by it in some way, I think. Yeah, it's simple. You can't like change it. You can't make it something nice. It's just what it is in its way. And this says, "Sipau mibachutz im nishtana kolo." If you painted gold leaf on the outside, such that it changed its sound, then it's not allowed. But if you just had like little details on it so that the sound's not changed, then that's okay. So it seems like you are allowed in some way to like put details on the shofar, as long as it doesn't change the sound. That's the point. Nothing can, I think what I'm taking from this is nothing is allowed to detract from the sound. This is so interesting. Natan shofar bisoch shofar. If you put a little shofar inside of the big shofar, such that what you hear is the little one, you fulfill your obligation. But if you hear the outside one, then you didn't fulfill your obligation. If you widen the bell, or if you narrow the mouthpiece, not allowed. Okay, why the little one inside the big one? It's like a turducken shofar. Does anyone here play horn? Like play like a trombone or a trumpet? This is like putting a mute in the shofar. it's going to alter the sound. To put a little shofar in the big shofar, if you're playing the little one, then it's like you're playing the little one. That's fine. But if you're playing the big one, if you're blowing the big one, the little one is going to obstruct the sound. And key to shofar, we're going to see again and again, is that nothing can get in the way, whether it's visual aesthetics or a change in the sound by altering the shape of the shofar, or literally an object obstructing the breath, right? There being a little shofar that's keeping the big shofar from sounding to its fullest extent. That's not allowed. So Rambam is making sure you have I appreciate Susie's suggestion of basic, not in like the Uggs boot wearing, North Face fleece wearing kind of basic, although it is pumpkin spice latte season, but still, I mean, I love a pumpkin spice, but rather basic in the sense of like that kivyachol lahavdil, God is basic, right? God is simple. God is pure, right? God is, it's very philosophical way, but Rambam uses the language of pashut, right? Like a flat sheet is pashut, right? Non-composite, right? Nothing else is made of God but God. Shofar is just shofar. It is a pure note that rocks your world.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there such thing as like shofars that are like kosher for Rosh Hashanah and ones that are not?
Well, we're looking at the ways in which people can alter it to make it not kosher for Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, if a shofar is split lengthwise, it's not kosher.
Because I've seen some that do have like they're very, very narrow at like the point where the mouthpiece, like where you blow, and some are wider. And I assume that's like where on the horn it was cut.
Yeah, that's all fine. Yeah. The issue is more that as long as you can get a sound out of it and it hasn't been changed in any kind of way, it's fine. But if it splits lengthwise, then you can't. If it splits like horizontally, then you can as long as there's enough that's the requisite size, it's fine. It can't be too small. It needs to be able to have some parts sticking out from either side of your hand when you're holding it. All right, but to this point, it says, Haya kolo av, this may be exactly what you're implying. Av odak utsarur kasher. If the shofar sounds fat or thin, I mean, it says low or high, but it's like a fat, baritone sax, or it's like a thin, soprano sax, otsarur, or if it's rough, it's all kosher. Shekol hakolos kasherin b'shofar. You understand that? All of the sounds are kosher. A shofar is just what it is. It doesn't need to sound like the ideal perfect shofar. The perfect shofar sounds like it sounds. If you're thinking from a top-down perspective of I need to make sure the shofar sounds right, you're not thinking about the shofar correctly. The shofar sounds like it sounds. I want to come back to that in a minute. But that is, I think, actually is key to the maybe spiritual significance of the shofar. If you blow the shofar and you're inside of a pit or you're inside of a cave, then let's not read the rest. Where would you have to be to fulfill the mitzvah? If someone's blowing shofar in a pit or a cave, where does the hearer need to be, the auditor?
You have to be on the outside to hear it. So
You mean
somebody
the
was
outside
blowing
of the shofar? Yes, that's true.
No. I mean, if they're blowing in a cave, so if you're at the opening of the cave, you probably have really good acoustics.
So you'd be in the outside of the cave.
Just at the opening, like the mouth of the cave.
Okay.
I think the acoustics would be really good from there, depending how far back in the cave the guy was. But
yeah,
I think you could hear it very well at that point. I don't think you have to be in the cave.
Okay.
It's going to echo.
Good. So this is the difference between the sound itself and an echo. If you're inside the cave, you fulfilled your obligation. You're right there. You heard the shofar. If you're at the mouth of the cave, as long as you can hear the actual shofar and not an echo, you've also fulfilled your obligation. But if you hear the echo, you didn't. Now, what is this teaching us?
The purity of the sound.
There's something immediate that's required with a shofar. It cannot be mediated. This is actually why I think the consensus halachic opinion is that you're not allowed to hear shofar over Zoom, over a phone, over, I mean, there's something for, like, let's say synagogues that use amplification, right, on Shabbat, right? If they have a microphone or something like that, you cannot blow the shofar into the microphone. There's some, but so that's the technical stuff. But think of it now philosophically or symbolically, no, experientially. It needs to be an immediate experience. It's not something that you're getting reflected off of something else. It is going from the shofar to you. It hits you. The first point of contact for a shofar needs to be you. It needs to be in contact with you.
Crazy question. What if a person is deaf, Never?
That's a really great question. I would actually love to look into some halacha. I mean, I would say, first of all, they're exempt, I would say. But let's say, I wonder if perhaps they could, like, put their hand on the shofar as it's being blown and to hear it in that kind of way, much like deaf people can, like, sit on top of, like, a speaker, like a subwoofer or something, and feel vibrations like that. And a kind of way of, like, hearing it through the bones in your head, right? That actually, that is the way you hear. I'd be interested actually to see if somebody has, like, a cochlear implant. I imagine actually that probably would not work for shofar, because it's that would be a reflected sound. But
I would like to hear the answer to that too, because I think that it would still be valid even if the person can't physically hear it, because the sound is still reaching them. Like, the sound is still physically going from the shofar, like, and still reaching the person. It's not, so even if
they have their hand on the shofar, you mean?
No, like, even if they're just standing there and the shofar is being blown, like, there's something, like you're saying, that has to be, that there can't be anything intermediate between you and the shofar. Like, so even if you're standing there and your brain isn't registering the sound is still hitting you. It's still, interacting with your body. I think maybe that's like Nancy's saying, like, there's a vibration, like there's like a physical, like the sound is physically hitting the person. So I think wouldn't that still be valid?
I might be more machmir in the sense that I think maybe you need to, I think if you're touching it, then to be actually impacted by the vibrations might be an analogy that comes to mind for me. If there's something happening, if there's a way in which something is occurring to you, like it's, someone blows the shofar and you do feel it in some kind of way, like if there's an experiential change, then I would count that as hearing. But I would say, if somebody is, hearing, as is not able to hear, then I would say something that in some way maps to that kind of experience might work. Like I was saying about touching the shofar.
So practically, if somebody wears hearing aids, you should take them out before you hear the shofar? Because you should, eh?
I actually, I think, and I'm not the only one to say that. I think
It never occurred to me, but now that you mention it, I should probably take out my hearing aids.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'm
not going to poskin on the YouTube, on the video. Let me look into it about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think though, just like my intuitive thinking about it is it's like a microphone. You know, like I would, especially like an implant, something like that. But actually an implant, I wonder if maybe a cochlear implant actually might work better, because what it's doing is it's translating the sounds actually into vibrations in your skull. But I wonder, but that might be like another like mediation of it. That's a question.
Why would the hearing aid be something you shouldn't? Wouldn't it help you hear it? So that would enhance the experience?
Because it's reproduced sound. It's a microphone and a speaker. Right, there's a little microphone in the hearing aid, like that right there, and it's got it, and it's like an earbud, right? It's a speaker into your ear.
I guess sorry, I have a question before we move on.
And if it's yontiv, moving them is more okay than if it's Shabbos. So yeah, Renee.
I'm just wondering, like, what part of us actually hears the shofar? Is it us physically hearing it, or is it something like our neshama hears? Like, I guess that's my question. That's what I'm saying. Like, if a person, even if the shofar is being blown and the person can't physically hear it, perhaps they're hearing it in a different way. Like, perhaps like there's something more Kabbalistic or deeper, maybe there's a deeper meaning, like we're hearing it regardless of whether we can physically hear or not.
Yeah, so I want to put a pin in that, okay?
Okay.
I want to come back to that when we come back to the Shabbos question.
Okay.
Right, because that's when we divest ourselves from the physical substrate, right? There's no physical shofar anymore. Okay, but I am interested in the physicality of it, material, like nature of sound, like the physical experience of sound, which is why I think I would insist more on this like thing I'm imagining or conjecturing about handling the shofar if you're not able to hear it auditorily speaking, because I want there to be some kind of transference of this vibration into you. That makes sense to me. And I'm saying this like as a way of trying to think like through ways to adapt the experience that's trying to be communicated to changed circumstances. But again, we're going to see that the experiential aspect of it, the physical aspect of it is, again, it's a setting. It triggers something to happen inside of you. So the question then is, could you go beyond it? But then we enter interesting waters. So let me hear it. If you blow a shofar into a big vat, right? I mean, have you ever like taken your phone and you're washing dishes and you put it in a glass, or you put it in like a cup or a bowl, and what you have is a speaker, right? You can't do that with the shofar. You can't have the reflected sound. It needs to be coming direct from the shofar to you. Again, like the first point of contact for a shofar is you. Now, remind me to go back to the one above, that short one before, but I want to keep it moving on. Similarly, though not relatedly, I would say, if you are blowing a shofar for fun, or you're teaching someone how to blow a shofar, do you think that you have fulfilled your mitzvah on Rosh Hashanah?
No, it has to be at the right time, at the right place.
Yeah, and similarly, and here's maybe an interesting point. If you hear somebody who's just like playing taps on the shofar or whatever, did that person fulfill their obligation?
I don't think so. You have to hear you need the chua and the tekiah. And
let's say they're practicing. They're practicing for Rosh Hashanah.
But you're not hearing it on Rosh Hashanah.
No, it's Rosh Hashanah morning. They haven't gone to shul yet. They're blowing a shofar in their house. They're practicing.
There's an intent piece.
You're quite right, there is.
Right? Like, it's just like, oh, I happen to hear this thing versus I am participating in hearing this thing.
Precisely. There is kavana that's essential to this mitzvah. Now, there's a big halachic controversy whether kavana, intention, is essential or ancillary to a mitzvah. And there's a lot to be said about that, like kind of the idealistic version of a mitzvah versus, let's say, the more realist version of a mitzvah, more inclusive nature of a mitzvah. But here in the shofar is where kavana really rules supreme. And it's not just kavana from the from the hearer's side. Like, okay, like, oh, we're all saying our kavanas, we're all like meditating on the sound of the shofar before we hear it. It has to also be on the sound, on the blower's side as well. There needs to be a unity of intention. When you're blowing it, you need to mean it for the sake of the mitzvah. And when you hear it, you need to mean it for the sake of the mitzvah. Niskaven shomea letzesi de chovaso, velo niskaven otokea lehotzio, osh niskaven otokea lehotzio, velo niskaven shomea letzes lo yatsa. If one person's intending and the other one's not, like one person's like, oh, it's Rosh Hashanah, this is for Rosh Hashanah. The other person's like, cool, horn sounds. It doesn't work. It needs to be contact, a concert. When I say concert, I mean a harmonized, unified, concerted effort. The listener is not passive. Listening is active. And the sounder of the shofar is not just accidental. The sounder is essential because it's their kavana that is one of the deciding factors. Ad sheyiskaven shomea umashmiya. Both the hearer and the sounder need to have kavan. Okay, so I want to go back. I think a unifying theme in all of these, let's say, negative regulations, right? The things you can't do, the things that keep shofar from happening, right? These guidelines. A common thread is that Rambam is trying to preserve the integrity and the purity and the immediacy of the experience. You can't change the visual character of the shofar. You cannot distract from the experience of hearing it. You can't change the sound to make it sound different. You can't blow it in a way that even if you're trying to like magnify the experience, the key to a shofar is hearing it as it is. You don't start from a place of ideal preference or optimization. You start imminently from the inside of the shofar, the sound that this specific horn can make. And to go back to that point, if its sound is fat or reedy or rough, it's kosher. All the sounds are kosher. There's something I think not just experientially interesting about that point, but also spiritually. That the shofar is teaching us and showing us that it's not about being an optimized, idealized individual or person. You don't need to be like the number one top rabbi. You don't need to be like the number one top good boy or whatever. All sounds of the shofar are kosher. Whoever you are is kosher. And the question that the shofar is trying to do is trying to blast us, to shake off all this other stuff to get to the heart of who we are. Whatever sound we have is kosher. The issue about shofar and in tshuva is getting all of the other stuff out of the way. Okay, so that is what I would call like the dialectics of shofar. That's trying to preserve the shofar experience, getting all the other stuff out of the way. But now I want to talk about the positive. Like, what is the shofar supposed to be making us think of when we hear it? Okay, so far we've kind of talked about more inchoate sense, like, oh, it hits us, it changes us, it impacts us, it alerts us, it awakens us. But in terms of ideational content, right, what is actually supposed to come to mind when we hear it? So there are a couple important psukim that mention the shofar. So I want to talk about two of them in conversation with each other. I'll start with this one from Pinchas. It says, "Uvachodesh hashvi bechad lechodesh mikra kodesh yelachem." In the 7th month, remember that in the Torah, the new year starts with Nisan. So the 7th month is Tishrei. So Rosh Hashanah is not Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. Rosh Hashanah is the 1st of Nisan. And it's not called Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. What is it called? Yom Truah Yelachem. It's called Shofar Day. It's the day of Truah. Okay. Here's a pasuk from Emor. Daber el bnei Yisrael lemor. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, B'chodesh hashvi b'chad lechodesh. First day of the 7th month. Yelachem Shabbason, you'll have a day of rest. Zichron Teruah Mikra Kodesh, a remembrance of the shofar, a holy day. What's the difference here? How is Rosh Hashanah called in the first pasuk? Yom Truah. And how is Rosh Hashanah called in the second pasuk? Zichron Truah. So it's Shofar Day versus remember the Shofar Day. Why do we have a difference here? Now remember, in Torah, Zecher, the word Zecher can mean a name. It can mean something that comes to mind. The root Zayin Chaf Resh doesn't really mean to remember per se. It really means to think of, or it to come to mind. So here it seems is the shofar itself. And here it seems to be what comes to mind with the shofar. Okay. So the Abarbanel commentary quotes a midrash that says, look, we have these two different verses. One says Yom Truah, Shofar Day, and the other one says Zichron Truah, remember shofar. What's going on? Well, it says the one that says Shofar Day refers to when Rosh Hashanah is on when? A weekday. And the one that says remember shofar, Zichron Truah, is when, Susie? Shabbos. Exactly. All right, so part of this is technical, that we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos. And you actually might ask why? Because we did a number of things on Shabbos that we don't do anymore, at least in the temple. But it seems like, why wouldn't the mitzvah, why can't you blow the shofar on Shabbos? Now there's like issues about taking the shofar and carrying it where you're not supposed to and da-da-da. But it seems like, I would say also, there's an issue also, it doesn't come up technically, but it's an issue about Hashmas Kol on Shabbos. We're not supposed to hear loud noises on Shabbos. Shabbos is a day of peace. Shabbos is not a day that's supposed to be distressing, disturbing. And that is part of what shofar is about, as we've seen. Shabbos is a soft and gentle day. But interestingly, it says, Al das pshat, according to just like the pshat reading of the text, Yom Truah, hu kimo zichron Truah. That shofar day, i.e. Rosh Hashanah on a weekday when we literally blow the shofar, and Shabbos Rosh Hashanah when we don't blow the shofar but we think of it, are equal. They're like each other. Because even on every single Rosh Hashanah day, we think of the shofar too. When? Well, the Musaf Amida is made of 3 major components. Malchuyot, when we think of God's kingship, Zichronot, when we think of God's memory, and Shofarot, when we bring to mind texts about the shofar. So thinking about the shofar seems to be equivalent to the shofar itself. The reason I'm bringing this in, I mean, we still need to hear the shofar. I'm not going all like Paul on us, in which we say, no, circumcision of the heart, not circumcision of the flesh. We do need the physical world, but we need the physical world to get to the spiritual truth. The blast of the shofar, the sound of the shofar is needed to shake us out of our stupor, to hit us, to contact us, to catalyze something inside of us. But the essence of it seems to be what's happening in our consciousness, what's happening in our interiority, what's happening in our hearts. That's the key to shofar. Okay, so I've taken us through, in a sense, these last few texts to look at the way that Rambam was trying to protect the physical experience, but the point of the physical experience of the shofar, and remember, every sound is kosher, is so that something happens inside of us. That's the telos of the shofar. Something needs to be occurring, and that's really what this class is about. That shofar needs to be doing something to us, arousing something inside of us, awakening something inside of us. So now I want to talk about what is it supposed to be awakening? What is it supposed to be making us think of?
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, Mom.
Shabbat, no. Rosh Hashanah never occurs Friday and Saturday, right?
Yes, the second day is never on Shabbos.
So I'm just wondering if thinking about the shofar, not being able to hear it, leads to greater anticipation and kavanah possibly on the second day.
I love that. So you can, it's surprising. You'd think maybe it's similarly, it's sometimes the case that the first day of Sukkot is also on Shabbos. But Hoshana Rabbah is never on Shabbos. The climax is never on Shabbos. So I really like that. I never thought of that before. That's a really interesting point. You'd think maybe the first day shouldn't be on Shabbos, because then you're missing like the special quality of the first day. But no, if you were to have the first day, but then the second day would be on Shabbos, it would be a ratchet down. It would be a deflationary momentum. But here, if the first day we get the juices flowing by focusing our consciousness, our intention on shofar, and then we manifest it in physical reality, right? It comes, you pull out the shofar on the second day and you actually blow it. And boom, everything like explodes. That's great. Okay. So we're going to move into kind of like moving towards the end of the class. But I want to kind of just hit the major themes that shofar makes us think of. Now, historically speaking, what's the main biblical event that shofar is associated with? There's a few, but what's one that comes to mind for you? So classically speaking, in this shows.
I was going to say going to war.
That is a very interesting association, which I neglect. Oh, no, I didn't. It comes up later. Don't worry. Okay. So yes, that is true. But I'm thinking in terms of story. So in terms of stories, the shofar is associated with Akedas Yitzchak.
The sacrifice. Well,
yeah, binding
the sacrifice interrupted.
Exactly. The sacrifices interruptus. It says Rashi, everyone comments on this, but Rashi says zichronus psuke shofaros, to remember the Akedah of Yitzchak, who was replaced by a ram, right? A ram, ne'achaz basfach, whose horns were tangled in the bramble. Okay. So we see this pasuk. Abraham looked up, his knife, his ma'acheles is extended over Yitzchak's neck. And God says, do not touch the boy. Or the angel says, do not touch the boy. And then Abraham looks up, kind of the way like Moses looks up and sees the burning bush. Abraham looks up and his eye happens upon a ram was caught in the thicket. And Abraham took the ram and sacrificed it instead. It's an incredible midrash. It actually says that the ram was one of the things that God created from the beginning of history, and in the twilight in between Friday and Shabbos. There's a number of things that were created at the beginning of time, and the ram is one of them. Moses' staff is another example. But it's actually saying that the ram has been waiting to do this since the beginning of the world. And it's like ready to do it. It's ready to fulfill its mission. It's a macabre mission, but it's a mission nonetheless. And Satan, the dreaded Samech Mem, tried to like distract the ram to make so that the ram doesn't announce itself to Abraham. Although interestingly, Abraham sees it. It's not like the ram was bleeding or anything like that. Bleating. Seems like Abraham's the one who had to see it. And I think it's a very interesting point about what are we noticing in our experience. So that's actually why, says the Midrash, it was caught in the bush, because Satan trapped it, trying to keep it. Because originally it seems like the ram was going to like run and like jump on the altar and be like, take me, Abraham. But the Samech Mem like trapped the ram, and Abraham luckily saw it anyway. So what did it do? The ram extended its leg and grabbed, nudged Abraham's leg, Abraham's coat. So Abraham saw it. Now, I find this like an immensely provocative association. You know, the Akedah shows up actually famously in the Tachanun prayer as well, when we say remember the Akedah. Tachanun is like a mini High Holy Days we say every day. We say to God, remember the Akedah. In other words, remember what we were willing to give you, and that should have credit with you. And there's a certain chutzpahdik impudence in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in which we say, you owe us, because we have been slaughtered, we've been slaughtered like lambs our whole existence. Isn't that enough, God? Do you need more from us? So there's a kind of a chutzpah nature of this as well. But it makes you think of I would say though, the shofar doesn't just make you think of the Akedah and the credit it's supposed to get us in heaven. It also, and this is the reason I brought in this really colorful midrash, I think it makes you think of the ram. The ram as someone, I want to say, committed to a mission, even if it's the end of it, or especially since it's the end of it. The ram is voluntaristically giving itself over to what God has in store for it. That kind of mesiras nefesh, that kind of devotion of self, what it means to really live for something. You gotta get busy living or get busy dying. I think that kind of existential commitment is also part of what shofar is trying to alert us to. It's not just about getting by. You know, like the Rabbi Jim Morrison said, no one gets out of here alive, right? The question is, what are you doing with your time? You're going to be on the altar too. Are you ready? So it's a bit of a darker reading of it, but I think the point really, it's saying the shofar is trying to wake us up, is trying to show us that. Okay. Another aspect of the shofar is also associated not with history, but with the future. It's associated with the Jubilee year and also with the coming of the Messiah. It says after 7 cycles of the Shemitah, the 7-year cycle, then you blow the horn in the 50th year on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is anticipating the redemption. Yom Kippur is 50. Yom Kippur is the completion of the cycle of redemption. So we're anticipating that. But shofar is also not just a sound of judgment, but it's a sound also of liberation. Like Deror Yikra, right? Liberation, let liberation be proclaimed. So the shofar makes us think of redemption. It makes us think of salvation. It makes us think of freedom. It makes us think also of social liberation. The Sforno says that that the blast of the shofar in the Jubilee is an expression of the joy of the freedom of the of slaves, right? At the 50th year, all slaves are set free. And also of Hasheves Hasados Laba'alehem, and also that the land is allowed to be free of human involvement. So it is the freeing of human beings from bondage and the freeing of the earth from being worked. So it's about this kind of release. So part of shofar is also cathartic in terms of capturing an experience of release and relief, of freedom and liberation. So another thing to think about when we hear the shofar is what in us needs to be freed. What freedom is waiting for us? What freedom do we need to actualize? What in us is bound up? And what do we need release from? So some more things to think about in advance of all of these things. I want to encourage us before Rosh Hashanah to sit down to think, like, write down some of your meditations for the shofar. What do you want to make sure to be thinking of when you hear it? How can you prepare yourself as a vessel to hear this sound? Right, I was saying before, like, you can't blow into a vat. You can't blow into a cave. You can't blow into a hole, because we're the space in which shofar resounds. We're that space in which shofar takes root and resonates. So how can we prepare ourselves as a vessel for the sound of the shofar? The shofar sound of trua, the one that's like a staccato blast, and also shivarim too, the one that goes 3 blasts, are also compared to a moan or a wail. The word is yevava in the Talmud, or actually a Rambam uses an Arabicism or an Aramaicism of yilala, like a ululation. It's the same word as ululation. And he compares it here to like mourning, the pain of exile. So it says, Trua zu ha'amura b'Torah nistapek lanu ba, safek lefi orech hashanim. Because of the length of the years of exile, we have some ambiguity. We have some lack of clarity about what it is supposed to be, what the shofar is supposed to be. He says there's a few different ways of thinking about it. Is it like a yilala? Is it the ululation, the wail? Shemiyalalim hanashim benehem be'es shemiyabavin. So in the Arabic world, but also is in the Levant in general, we see this in the Talmud as well. There were women who were professional wailers, not like Bob Marley, but they were like hired to get the feeling going at a funeral. You'd hire them to cry. You'd hire them to wail. This is something that was done for Tisha B'Av as well. That there's something in particular about like the way women's voices can reach certain kinds of registers and resonances that trigger certain kinds of emotional responses from people. The wailing sound in that kind of way. So the shofar is compared to that noise, that there's something of regret in it, of remorse. So another way to think about the shofar as resonating something inside of us that we, something to think about and to mourn over the past year. I think over this past year, there's a lot to think about in that way, I imagine, to give yourself space to think about these things, to give yourself, again, the catharsis, the release of what it means to cry about something, to wail about something. So the shofar is a sound of grief. So we see shofar as a sound of joyous liberation, and at the same time, shofar is a sound of grief. Shofar is about the intensity of feeling more than it's about a specific feeling. Or it's a moan, says the Rambam, like a person moans time after time, when you're troubled by something big, when your heart is troubled by something, the way you just moan about it. Shofar can also be a sound of anxiety, a sound of worry. So here we have Rambam freeing up some more different emotional space for what the shofar is. And I think there's a text I had before, but I guess but like what Lauren was saying also, that the shofar is also blown when you go to war. And I think in this case, what we're going to see is the shofar is a call to attention. Like, how do you pronounce, like, reveille? Is that what it's called? Like when you blow the, if you're at camp, right, and they blow the bugle as they raise the flag. Shofar is calling your forces to attention. You're marshaling your forces inside. So just to summarize, right, the different, shofar is something that's supposed to impact us directly. It's an immediate experience. It catalyzes something inside of us. And it makes us think of the Akedah, of the commitment to that mission of the ram, or also the sacrifice that we've had and the way in which God needs to recognize what we have done. So a kind of security and confidence. Also the freedom of liberation from our constraints, from what's tying us down, trying to break ourselves open, expand ourselves. But it's also a sound of wailing and of mourning and of regret and remorse, to give ourselves the space to feel sad and regretful as well. Rambam sees in this teaching from Hilchos Tshuva, the laws of redemption, he brings in an incredible image. He says that even though the shofar is a biblical commandment, it still has an experiential meaning to it. And what is it? It's saying, Uru yisheni mishanaschem v'nirdamim hakitzu mitar damaschem. Wake up, you sleepers, from your slumber. You people who are nodding off, wake up from your sleep. V'chapsu b'ma'asechem, and search out your deeds. V'chizeru b'tshuva, and return in tshuva. V'zichru bora'achem, and remember your creator. There are those who forget the truth because of the vanities, the absurdities, the meaningless BS of our lives. And they've wasted their years with nonsense and emptiness, which does not do anything for you and does not help you. Habitu l'nafshoseichem. Look at yourselves. Inspect yourself. Behetivu darchechem, and correct, improve, work on how you behave. Umat and your habits. V'yazov kol echad mikem darko hara, and leave your bad habits, your bad habituated ways, and the bad ways that you're thinking. Thus, every person needs to look at themselves every year, each and every year, as if you're half on the right side and half not. And the point of that thought experiment is to say, this day is what's hanging in the balance. This day could save you or wreck you. It could raise you up high, it could lower you down. This could make you or break you. This day matters. Your choice matters. The key to Rosh Hashanah, and I think this is really the key that we saw before, is that the shofar can't be an accident. It needs to be on purpose. Shuva can't happen. You cannot coast. I mean, Rambam's saying you are on autopilot. We're all on autopilot. How much we're just trying to get by. The shofar is trying to call us to attention. That not only can we get better, we must. And the only thing standing in the way of that is us. The shofar is blasting away everything that obstructs us to get to the core of what we need to be focusing on. I want to look at this last text, and this will close. So the Avodas HaMelech commentary on the Mishnah Torah focuses on this image of the shofar as a spiritual alarm clock. Right? Another kind of prompting question, if you want to do some like meditative or journalistic writing, is like, what does it mean to wake up? What do I need to awake to? What does it mean for me to be sleeping? And use this gorgeous language. It says, Tiku b'chodesh shofar. Tiku b'chodesh. Why is it use the word chodesh? Chideshu ma'aseichem. Renew your deeds. Shofar. Why the word shofar? Shiperu ma'aseichem. Beautify your deeds. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Shipartem aseichem lefanai, hareini na'aseh lechem kishofar hazeh. An incredible paradox. God says, if you beautify your deeds before me, I will make you become like this shofar. But if we remember, the shofar is not allowed to be beautified. The shofar is just supposed to look like a shofar. You're allowed to do some minor detailing. The shofars cannot be fundamentally changed. But what are we supposed to be aesthetically paying attention to? Ourselves. It's not the object of the shofar that needs to be beautified, perfected, improved. It's us. And it's an actually incredible point, because God's saying, if you work on yourself, then I will make you like the shofar. But what is the shofar like? The shofar is just like itself. What it means to work on yourself, to perfect or improve your deeds, is not to make you someone else, but rather to make you yourself, to make you you. And that's the telos, the end result of this shofar experience. And it's an incredibly optimistic point, but one that's resolved in its optimism. That we can change, that God believes in us that we can change. And the shofar is here to remind ourselves of that, to give ourselves a broad range of reactions to it, to feel happy about liberation, sad about what you've lost or what you regret, excited, committed. But the point of it is to open up space in yourself so that the shofar resounds within you and you can start looking inside. It's to break open space so you can get inside and to look around and to do a checkup, to do a tune-up, to figure out what needs your attention. And it says, when you pick up the shofar to blow, you resolve yourself to be renewed, to start again, to start afresh. That we have what's promised to us, what's offered to us is a new beginning. And it's an incredible point. Even if your hands are stained from sin, God will cover you. The shofar is not about perfecting yourself or pretending you're something better. The shofar is about realizing who you really are and working on that. What God asks of us is only really that, but there's so much that gets in the way. So the unifying, I think, like meaning of shofar is this blast, this sound, the vibrations of it. It's like, for if you ever use like a jewelry cleaner, like one of those supersonic trays that clean jewelry, the vibrations shake off this accreted stuff on the outside. The shofar is having us shake off our idealized ego image, how we think we should be, what we think we need to be like. And the shofar is like, no, every sound in the shofar, fat, skinny, rough, ready, every sound is kosher. And it's opening up space in ourselves for that resonance to occur, to make space for us to really inhabit ourselves from the inside, to reach in, to dig in, and to really start the work. So something to think, so a bunch of stuff to think about. I'll share the source sheet in the chat. The next We'll have Kabbalah Shabbat tomorrow evening at 7. Still sign up for Shabbos services, 9:30. Havdalah at 9 p.m. on Saturday on Zoom. And then the next class, where we'll be looking actually what the shofar does to God, will be next Thursday at 7:30. I hope to see you there. Please tell your friends. Good Shabbos and early Shana Tova.